Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Princess Alexandra School. We're here to discuss the current state and future outlook of the national... I beg your pardon, Princess Margaret. Thank you for the correction. And we're here to discuss the current state and future outlook for the National Insurance Fund. My name is Rawdon Adams. I'm the Deputy Chair of the NIS. And with me on my right is the independent actuary, Derek Osborne, whose firm authored the 17th Actuarial Review. And to his right is our CEO, Kim Tudor, and she'll be here also to pick up all the service and related questions that you may have this evening. We expect the chairman to arrive shortly, but in his absence, I'm going to kick off. So there are a few things that we want to change up tonight because we've been listening to some of the feedback that we've had on social media. So the first relates to the number 72. A lot of people believe that we have already decided to take some kind of action and raise the retirement age. We have not done that. When we've spoken about options, that number has stuck in people's minds, but there is no decision made, although all options are on the table. Now, the second, and I think many people are concerned about the fund itself and how it is managed, the amount of money that's in there, how it's performed, and so on and so forth. Our view is that what we have is primarily a demographic problem, and I'm going to set out and explain why that is. It is not a management of the fund problem. The fund, since inception in 1967, has always earned income each and every year. It has never had a losing year where it's failed to make money. And I'm going to ask Derek if he could just pull up a chart that I'm going to speak to a little bit. So we can distribute this afterwards because it's quite a busy chart. But the key messages here, that red line, that represents the performance of the National Insurance Fund. Over 20 years, it's averaged over 6%. It's never had a losing year in terms of earning income. And since inception, it's earned just under 6%, about 5.8%. Its returns have been steady. You notice that red line is almost horizontal. And we put a couple of other lines there to show what would have happened if you decided as a pension fund trustee or good fiduciary to put your money into the blue line, which is the American stock market, S&P 500, has good returns, but it's got a lot of variability, and it's had 4 negative years in the last 20 years. Similarly, even US 10-year bonds backed by Uncle Sam, they got a lot more variability than the National Insurance Fund, and they've also had negative years. That red line shows you a very steady, predictable, boring, monotonous return by the investment unit who have been running the fund. Now, I don't know if we can scroll down a little bit. The bottom table is comparing what the National Insurance Fund has done over different periods of time. Over 20 years, it's been better than putting all your money into real estate in the United States, because that's the easiest index we have to use. It's been better than the US 10-year bond. And as I said earlier, it's only been beaten by equities and corporate bonds, which are riskier than what it's decided to do. This is not a pattern that represents bad management or poor investment decisions. Now, on that chart, there's a little bit of information on the lower left side that shows actually how big the fund is and how it has grown over the years. So starting in 2005, this fund was about 1.9 billion. And right up until 2017, it's been increasing in size. Then we had the debt restructure and the haircut. Even with that, it's still a very strong fund that is still returning money. Even through 2018, 19, and 20, this fund earned income, even with the impact of the debt restructure. It's a well-run fund, it's not the problem. Now, I'm going to say because it may not be clear to everybody, but in our system, benefits are financed by the working population. That's the heart of our system. The fund is like a savings account. You dip into it when you need to dip into it, but otherwise you try very hard not to. Now, when we had our reforms in 2004, there were things that the architects could not anticipate would happen, and these relate to the demographics. These started to become clear in 2013, because that was the first year that we had to dip into the fund. Until that time, the working population was contributing sufficiently to pay all the benefits of all our retirees. But since 2013-2014, the fund has had to make up a growing deficit as our retiree population gets bigger and our working population gets smaller. Both of them are going the wrong direction. Today, the fund only makes up 25% of the cost of benefits. It is 75% of our benefits are still financed by the working population. This is why we want to state categorically this is a demographic problem. This is not a fund problem. When we've done the other town halls, I've gone into some data to try and make this really clear. So I'll do it again. I hope that you weren't at the last two town hall meetings, or this will bore you a little bit. But there are three questions. The first is, are you aware of what the life expectancy of a child who's born today is? How long can a Barbadian child born today, expect to live? Anybody can answer, you know. It's about 80. Someone born today can expect to live to be 80 years old. Now, in 1967, life expectancy for that same child, if they'd been born then, was 67. So today, we have retirees living a lot longer and drawing their benefits for a lot longer than the architects of this system anticipated. They built a house in 1967 that's obsolete today. They never thought that retirees were going to be drawing these benefits for this long. So the second question relates to the average number of children that women have today. Again, if anybody knows the answer, with these fans I can't hear, but I will tell you it's under 2. It's about 1.7. Now in 1967, the average number of children that women had was just under 4. Again, the architects in 67 saw that they had people who were retiring and living to be about 67, and they had a population that was growing and a working population that was growing. Today, we don't have either of those. Now, the third question relates to the economy and how the economy has been performing. I don't think it's a secret that in recent times, the last 14, even 15 years, the economy has not been on fire. And in fact, the average rate of economic growth is under 1% a year. In 1967, on average, in every single year of the 1960s, it was nearly 7%. So when this house that the NIS was built in 1967, it was in an environment with a strong growing economy, an increasing population, and people who were not expected to survive much beyond 67. We don't have any of those things today. Our system our environment has made that system completely obsolete. This is why we say that this is a demographic problem. Now, the next point to consider is how big is this problem that's been created? Because we're throwing about these big numbers about the fund and so on, but as the actuary will go through, and this is in the NIS report, this difference between the growing number of retirees and the shrinking population means that we're going to have a deficit of $1.6 billion in 2050. And it still grows even wider than that, $2.6 billion in 2060. These are big numbers, and they dwarf all the concerns and questions around the way the fund is managed, which, as I hope I've underlined, is pretty well compared to international standards and just about any other concern that we can think of. All of those things we have to deal with, be it compliance, governance, and so forth. But this is first and foremost a demographics problem. Before I hand over to Derek, I just want to say that many countries have faced this same problem. From Sweden to Chile, Latvia, Italy, Portugal, there are all kinds of places that have had these issues. So we have a lot of experience that we can draw upon when we're trying to craft a Barbadian solution. Some things we know already are not going to be acceptable. You know, we released a survey today, and we know already what people are thinking about increases to retirement age or increases to contributions. But there are solutions that can be put in place. So we are very positive and motivated, but we consider it our duty to explain really clearly what we think the issues, the fundamental issues are, without underweighting or saying they're not important, all the other things that people are concerned about. So with that, Derek, I think I'm going to hand over to you to proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chair, and good evening, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be with you this evening. And as Mr. Adams just said, you know, we have some challenges, and we're getting ready to find a Barbados solution to a Barbados challenge. So every 3 years, the Act requires that the board engage an actuary to make long-term projections of the National Insurance Fund. This is the 17th time it's been done, and it's been done on schedule. And the results are less favorable than they were last time. The general outlook is similar. And so before we start, let's talk about the NIS and why it exists and what it serves to do. So just over 55 years ago, the ILO came to the Caribbean, and when they came to Barbados, they recommended this European-type model of Social Security that covered benefits for old age, invalidity, sickness, employment injury. And the goal essentially today is the same as it was 55 years ago, but things have changed. And so it's important that we make sure that the model we have today, the approach we use today, and the structure we have today is consistent with the economy, with the labor market, and the people of Barbados today. The overall objective, we try to put in one sentence, which essentially is to have a comprehensive system of social protection, so income support when you lost your income. It should reflect Barbados' value system, not Germany, not Canada, the US, or the UK, but Barbados' value system. It should respond to changing conditions locally, economic changes, social changes, demographic changes, and it should satisfy the 120,000 customers who pay contributions and the 50,000 people who get benefits every single month. In so doing, if you think about benefits, people tend to always want more. But you have to balance that with affordability. And so these first two terms, adequate benefits and affordable contributions, we have to make sure we have a good balance between those two, and both for the short term and for the long term. And for the long term, we have to worry about sustainability. If you think about a 25-year-old who went to work for the first time last week, they're going to have to work just over 40 years to qualify for a pension, and they hope to live another 25 years after that. So it's really a long-term promise. So we have to make sure that when we are thinking today and planning today and devising a solution today, that we have in mind our children and grandchildren who are going to expect to get this pension that's been promised to them. We also have some things that we want to avoid. So we have things we want to achieve, and a few things we want to avoid. The first one is the fund being depleted, and that's the worst case scenario for any pension system, that the assets, they run out, and you have difficulty meeting pensions each month. The second challenge that I mentioned a while ago would be asking children and grandchildren to pay substantially more than what we're now charging today or get less benefits than what's available today. And the third one, which is really a huge problem, not a financial problem for the fund, but a real financial concern for the 25,000 self-employed people in Barbados, only 1 in 8 pays contributions today. So for all the people who are informal sector, the vendors, ZR drivers, plumbers, carpenters, some lawyers, some doctors, the vendors, the fisher folk, and so on, only 1 in 8 contributes. What that means is that when they get old, 7 of 8 of these people are going to have no secure income in old age, more than likely, and they're going to be dependent on their children, maybe the neighborhood, and if things come worse, the government. And we've always seen governments kick in when people are left without. And so one of the goals certainly will be to have these self-employed people start contributing and protecting themselves with a secure income in old age. You may recall that 18 years ago in 2004, NIS made some reforms, and the hope was that those reforms would have made the fund sustainable for the medium term. Unfortunately, the economy and the population have not cooperated as we would have liked. What we have right now in Barbados is more deaths than births since 2017, which means that we're adding fewer people than are dying, and with migration being net positive going out, the population is actually declining each year. As Mr. Adams said, the economy has not performed well over the last 10, 15 years. Employment levels are down. The economy has contracted in more years than it has expanded. This particular graph shows that of the last 13 years, the economy has been negative. Even with COVID, 1 year with COVID, prior to COVID, it was down 8 of those 12 years. We see from the number of contributors and the number of employed persons also trending downwards. We see the orange line, which is from the Barbados Statistical Service quarterly survey. They show that the number of people who are actually working is coming down from over 134,000 in 2011. It fell to, even before COVID, 124,000 in 2019, and lower today, but coming back up with the recovery. On the NIS side, which is a yellow line, the number of contributors down from almost 130 to under 105. So if you think about a family who has 6 children, taking care of their elderly parents is not that difficult. Each of them share the bills of their parents, and they can make ends meet quite easily. If you only have 2 children or 1 child to support those elderly parents, the burden is much greater, as you can imagine, on that one particular child or those 2 children. And the same is true for the country from a tax perspective, and true for NIS from a contribution perspective. The more people you have taken out for every one putting in, the bigger burden we have on those who are putting in. So we also had debt restructuring 4 years ago in 2018. The government of Barbados decided to restructure its obligations to bondholders. And in so doing, the NIS, as a large holder of government paper, lost just over $1 billion in assets. Right? The truth about the debt restructuring, while there were economic objectives for debt restructuring, hopefully to make Barbados a stronger and the economy stronger, the NIS only really lost 3 years' worth of reserves. So had debt restructuring not occurred, the projection that you've seen for the fund to be depleted in the mid-2030s was only changed by 3 years. And that's because, and we see later on, the deficits are going to be so large in the mid-2030s, that would have been the case. But debt restructuring hopefully was designed for a stronger Barbados economy, because we cannot, whatever changes we make in the next few months or next few years, even with all those changes, a strong NIS will not be possible unless there's a strong economy. NIS depends on contributors and also investment income, which are both driven by a strong economy locally. COVID-19, we know, affected employment in 2020 and a little bit in 2021. So NIS contribution income was down. As I mentioned a while ago, self-employed persons, only 1 in 8 contributes. And the last two have been challenges that NIS has faced in the last 10, 12 years, where service levels have been below expectations, long times to pay claims, unemployment, sickness, maternity. We've heard the stories. And more importantly, we're late in delivering on financial statements that should be going to the minister and going to Parliament every single year. So there's been a backlog of audited financial statements and a delay in paying claims. In terms of the outlook for the population first, and then we look at the fund second. So I mentioned a while ago that we're having more deaths than we are births, which further suggests that the population will be declining year after year after year. The challenge for the NIS from a declining population is more so because of the elderly population, which is increasing rapidly, and NIS's major benefit expenditure is old age pension. 73% of NIS benefit expenditure goes towards paying old age pension. So we see from the chart that the green segment at top is increasing, while the blue, which is the children, and the yellow, which is the working age population, they're both shrinking. When we project that onto the National Insurance Fund, which is just over $4 billion 2 years ago, just under $4 billion today, what we see is that the funds are going to be depleted between 2034 and 2041 if nothing is done. And that's critical to take note of. The projections that the actuary makes is based on if nothing happens. We make many assumptions, but these are the rules as they are: contribution rate unchanged, benefit rules unchanged. This next chart shows the cost of benefits compared to the contribution rate. So the orange line is at 18%, which is the current contribution rate. And again, if nothing happens, the green line is what we project the cost of NIS to be over time. So what we have now already, the cost of NIS, benefits and admin costs, exceeds contributions by 6%. So 18% average coming in, about 24% going out. So there's a gap between contributions and expenditure. That gap is expected to widen as we add more add more persons to the population, and we also have fewer contributors being projected. When we convert that into dollars and cents, this chart shows the projected contribution income in blue, which is about $600 million this year and going forward. However, the expenditure is already over $800 million a year. So the gap between contributions and expenditure is just over $200 million already. So that gap has to be filled in order for NIS to consistently pay its benefits on a weekly and monthly basis. So what you have in front of you is the yellow, which is investment income, which is the investment returns on the nearly $4 billion that's invested, mainly in government paper. And all of that is already been used to pay benefits. So if you think about your household expenditure, you have income, you have expenses. If your income is not enough, you have to go into your savings to help meet the difference. And so the green segment is the selling or the depletion of assets to help meet benefits. So a little bit this year, but growing amounts in the next few years, until eventually you have no more savings. This is very much unlike your own personal family, where if you keep going into your savings, they'll eventually be depleted. Now we have to make sure we appreciate that NIS not having any funds does not mean no more NIS. It just means that the gap has to be filled in order for NIS to continue to top up the contributions to pay the benefits. So what we have is that in the late 2030s, the orange takes over, and the gap is represented by the orange, which is about $700 million that has to be filled. And the options are going to be either from the contribution side, because we no longer have any asset if that happens, so it has to be either contributions or benefits. Okay? And we'll discuss later on what those options are. So the key thing to remember, there's no crisis today. The fund is paying benefits as expected, and once they're able to work them, and the pensions are run every month as usual, benefits are being paid, and there's no chance of the fund running out of any cash in the short term. So I'm sure you'll agree with me based on what we just saw, what I just said, that the fund currently is not sustainable at the current contribution rates and benefit provisions. It doesn't mean it cannot be made sustainable in the future. So the question is, how could a $4 billion fund, that's a lot of money, how could that fund be depleted so quickly? What we have in front of us are three main reasons, or how could it be depleted? Three main reasons. The first one is demographics. We've heard before from Mr. Adams, and you've seen the projections for the future of the population. You know, there's 3.6 people paying in for every one taken out back when reform was done 18 years ago. Today it's 2.4, or maybe 2.3 today based on the numbers in front of us for 2 years ago. Right? That number is getting smaller every single year. We projected falling below 2, even 1.7. So again, the example I gave earlier about the family size. When you're down to one child having to support your parents, it becomes a burden on only one versus 4 children back in 2004. We also have no guidelines. So the actuary has come in time and time again, and the projections are that the fund will be depleted one day. But there's no requirement for the government to act upon those results or recommendations. And so hopefully when we have completed our discussions and we find the Barbados solution for this Barbados problem, it will include some specific triggers, some specific targets that need to be met. And if they're not met, then certain actions need to happen to ensure we have that promise of long-term sustainability. And the third reason why the fund could be depleted is if we do nothing. Kick the can down the road, leave it for the next set of people, next government to do, and then the reforms become more extreme, the changes become more draconian, and they become more painful. And so what we're doing now is certainly not kicking the can down the road and trying to deal with the situation that confronts us. And yes, there are some solutions. What we believe that there are 4 ingredients that we need to find a way to mix them up in the pot and have a sustainable national insurance. The first one, as we keep mentioning, you've heard Mr. Adams, you've heard me, is the economy. We have to find a way to get the economy growing year after year after year, creating new jobs, creating higher paying jobs. And that requires attracting foreign investment, attracting Barbadians to come back home, attracting non-Barbadians to come to Barbados, creating jobs, for teachers, nurses, carpenters, plumbers, drivers. The economy has to get going. Increase contribution income, increase investment rates of return, create new opportunities for investment for both the fund and for Barbadians in general. The second one is good design. As we heard, 1966 was when the fund started, 67. So the ILO was here just before that. The system was designed for a different era. If you think about where we are today, we have over 25,000 people who are self-employed in the formal sector. There might have been 1,000 probably in 1966. Times have changed. NIS has not been successful at all. As I told you earlier, only 1 in 8 are collecting contributions from informal sector self-employed workers. We have to meet them where they are. They don't want to leave their job, whatever they're doing, and come to NIS between 8 and 4 with their check or with their cash and a form filled out overnight, and they have to pay by a certain date. Those days are gone. We have to find a way to meet them where they are, allow them to pay with no forms. They had a very good season of the taxi driver, January, February, March. They can pay all their contributions up front one day, but they can spread it over 3 or 4 quarters, and so on. So no forms, no set date, no specific amount. They have good funds today, go online, transfer to NIS, it's in their account. We also have to have efficient and effective admin systems. We've seen a lot of changes during COVID, where a lot of companies who in the past were resistant to change, they've put systems in place and they've made life so much more efficient for their customers and consumers. NIS and the government of Barbados need to find ways that all systems speak to one another, licensing and NIS and BRA and so on, they all speak. So there's consistent and comprehensive tax collection, contribution collection, even social services and other benefit programs need to have systems where you can't get 2 benefits if you only should get 1. Right? So we want to have systems that are designed in a way that there are no there are no gaps and there are no duplications. And that's between NIS and the government programs. And the final ingredient is honest and responsible government. And this is not only the government of Barbados, but also all leaders. So the Prime Minister, Cabinet, all ministers, the NIS chairman, deputy chairman, the CEO, the entire board, executive management team, all organizations within Barbados being honest and responsible with the population. When challenges lie ahead, they deal with them in the best way possible today. And I think what we have going on right now is a good example of the government being proactive, seeing the report, seeing the projections, and trying to deal with this right away. So there are a few options. As I mentioned earlier, if in your household you have challenges with finances, there are only two things you can really do. You have more money coming in, or have less money going out. On the income side, we can hopefully add more contributors by better compliance, as well as a bigger economy. The contribution rate could be increased to bring in more contribution income. Hopefully, they're higher paying jobs. So with economic growth, typically comes salary increases and more jobs with higher wages. That would create more income. And the fourth option would be injections from government. But we have to remember that any money that government puts into the scheme comes from taxpayers. And for the most part, taxpayers are the same employees and workers who pay contributions to the NIS. On the benefit side, we have three main options, but one of them has quite a few sub-options, if I could say that. So I'll start at the bottom. So every year, pensions are increased with the cost of living adjustment. There was none last year and this year, but for the most part, since 2004 when reforms were done, pensions have been increased every January. They've been small, but they're designed to ensure that pensioners can maintain their standard of living by buying the same amount of bread and sugar and sardines that they bought 5 years ago, they could still buy today. That will continue, but the option is that we probably give them less than the full cost of living adjustment to help bear the burden of ensuring the scheme is sustainable for the long term. The second option from the bottom is to start pensions later. Right, so if you think about pension costs down the road, there are really two other things that we can do. One is have people start a little bit later than they would ordinarily start, and the other one is to reduce the average new pension amount. So in terms of starting later, as the Deputy Chairman said, 72 was mentioned, but it's an option. And it may not mean 5 years from now. It certainly won't mean 20 years from now. It may be an option for 20, 30 years from now. We have countries who've planned for 72 across the world, given life expectancy increases. When it comes to making the average pension a little bit smaller, there are several ways that we can do that. There's a formula right now that's based on the number of contributions you've made and your wages over the best 5 years of your career. We can extend those 5 years to your whole career. We can find ways to make the system progressive, so higher income people get proportionately less than lower income people, based on the contributions they've made. We can target benefits to specific groups, again, to the most vulnerable, to the lower income workers. We can look at even making it more equitable. So if you put in more, you get more. And that'll encourage more self-employed people probably to contribute. And the final one is a different structure. So as we heard before, 55-year-old system, no longer totally relevant to today's economy and labor market. We can look at the structure. As the chairman said, nothing has been decided. Everything is on the table. Everything is on the table. And this last slide summarizes what I've mentioned before. The first age for benefit is now 60. That could be made 61, 62, 63. The first age for a full pension unreduced is 67. That could be made 68 or 69, maybe 70. Change the formula I mentioned a while ago. Right now, it just takes 36 years to get to the 60% maximum benefit. That could be made a little longer. So people who are without full benefit get slightly less. We can also reduce the maximum 60% to possibly 55%. So again, a less generous system overall that can help make it more sustainable. I mentioned the career earnings pension. I mentioned the progressive pensions. And the final one here would be a different structure, which means that we can do things differently. What we can possibly do is many countries do this, where everybody who is old in the population gets a benefit from the state. Everybody, just because you're old. And that helps alleviate poverty. On top of that can be placed a smaller NIS. And that will take care of the people who've contributed, and based on their earnings, they get a pension that's linked to the number of contributions they made and their earnings. So together, those two provide that base, that safety net, and then those of you who have pension plans that you've contributed to or participated in along the way, that would further top up your income in the old age. So what we have in front of us are a range of options. As I said earlier, it's a Barbados problem, and we really want to find a solution that fits Barbados in 2022 to 2025 and 35 and 45. And changes will have to happen along the way, but we hope they're minor. So in Canada, for example, they made some reforms 25 years ago, and they have surpassed their expectations significantly. They've invested, in a very aggressive way, and the investment returns are doing really, really well. And the population is growing because they have a mass migration policy. So there are things that can be done to a major overhaul, or we can tweak, but certainly the anticipation is that we look at the structure, we look at all the parameters, and find this Barbados solution for the Barbados problem. And so we want to hear from you. There's a short window in which we have to have consultations and get feedback from stakeholders and individuals. Hopefully we can have a good discussion tonight and answer the questions that you may have. And we'll mention the survey. There's a survey that's now open. We'll share with you the link. And so hopefully you can do the survey tonight and share with all your friends and family. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek. This is the section where we'd like to hear from you, suggestions, ideas, reflections. So please, the floor is open. Just state your name when you come up and speak clearly. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Dwayne Burke. I do have a number of questions for you all related to the session you had at Commer, and I hope that this question I have now, which I prefer to ask later, but I have a comment on the chart that you made about the investments and the non-negative investment returns. You should have just ended it there, and the chart that you showed bears no relevance to the investment management performance. As you know, the NIS is a portfolio of funds made up of various asset classes, and you cannot compare a portfolio to individual securities, to individual asset classes to evaluate investment management performance. A portfolio is evaluated on the basis of risk and return, risk-adjusted return, and the performance measurement tools in there are the Jensen, Sharpe, and Trainer ratios. And what you're doing here, bears no relevance to the investment management performance, because that doesn't tell us nothing. That's like comparing apples to animals, not even other fruit.
Thanks. I was just going to make a comment on that. When we brought this up, we could have put in Sharpe ratios, trainers, information, all of these things. But the point here was to show, in very broad terms, how the NIF fund has performed compared to other asset classes. We didn't do a risk-adjusted basis because we thought most people probably won't gather that. But I will say that there are valid comparisons here because the fund is primarily a bond fund, and the next biggest class is real estate. So you will see there, we've got 2 bond categories and 3 bond categories and a real estate category. It's true we didn't break them out, but at the moment, and historically, this fund has been over 50% invested in bonds. It would be very hard to put a true benchmark in there because we're in Barbados. We're in an environment where capital controls have existed for a long time. So we didn't try to do that overnight because we knew there were a lot of concerns and questions about the fund overall. But I do think that this fund has a lot of value. It shows it's not a volatile fund. It shows, well, you can't tell here, but it has never failed to earn income since 1967, every single year. You can't say that about U.S. Treasury bonds backed by Uncle Sam. You can't say it about 3-month T-bills. This is designed to show people this fund has returned money every single year. If we want to put in risk-adjusted ratios and so on, we can break that out also. But this had a specific purpose this evening.
What I'm saying is that you should have ended it as saying it had no negative investment returns, but you should not be using it to benchmark or have any basis unless you're comparing apples to apples. And you're not, because you're using a portfolio to measure against individual asset classes, and you cannot do that. It has no relevance. It has no relevance in a risk-adjusted return. You simply just cannot do that. All you have to say is that it had no negative returns and done. But that chart, you should not be using that chart.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burke. The floor is still open. Would anyone else like to come and ask a question?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tanya Clark. Now that we're on this topic of investments, I hope I didn't miss this because I was a little late, but I didn't see in your equation when you were comparing income options versus benefit options and how you would make adjustments or changes to that, you mentioned anything about the investment strategy changing. Have you considered a more aggressive strategy? Because you said 50% was in bonds, I think, currently? Of the fund is in bonds?
I said historically it's been above 50%.
Above?
At the
Okay.
moment it's actually closer to 67%.
67. So have we considered having a more aggressive investment strategy? Because you say it's not crisis level yet, so we do have a timeline to work with. So can we add that to the equation? Or has that been added to the equation? We could partner with some successful investment funds, pension funds, and maybe get their input on what we could possibly do to kind of allocate our assets differently?
Well, on this chart, you do see it does say higher investment earnings. And it certainly is something that we're looking at. How can we adjust the portfolio strategy?
Okay.
So all ideas on the table. I just wanted to, as you're out there, I looked up the performance of two of the best-known superannuation funds.
Mm-hmm.
Right, one is New Zealand's superannuation fund, which is considered a benchmark both for governance and performance. And one is Norway's pension fund. So I would say the bond elements of those portfolios are actually worse than ours. But the equity elements, which is like the S&P 500 and so on, are better. But the investment guidelines are quite different. So New Zealand, for example, allow 80% of those funds to be invested in equities. We don't. We're predominantly a bond fund. But
we have to do things differently. That's what I'm saying.
That is very true.
Yeah.
I would just say the earlier chart, one of the points of putting that up was that if you go into equities, there's a lot more volatility.
Yes, but
Right.
we have the timeline. You're saying that we have time. You know,
I'm saying we
it's not
have
crisis
time
level.
to fix the problem.
It's not crisis level, but over time, it should have a positive return, no? If we do it right, if we balance it just right.
All ideas are on the table.
Okay.
That's. I think we can stop there for a moment.
Thank you.
Good evening, sirs. Good evening, madam. Nicholas Hartman, and you may hear my accent is not from here, but I've chosen this country as my home country, and I really love it here. I do not want to live in a country without a national insurance, so I'm very happy to have the opportunity to share some thoughts. As you rightfully said, one option is to increase the contribution rate, but that makes work more expensive. Increase pensionable age, also an option, but in addition to that, maybe looking at what could be a number of years of contributing. So to compare someone who's starting young at 20 years to work, maybe after 40 years of contribution, he should be eligible to go for a pension. But someone who started at 35 contributing, you probably need to take a little longer until you get a pension. Also in regards of considering what is the baseline of the pension, is the best 5, 7, 9 years whatsoever. But another big country, my home country, they use a lifetime earnings. So in other words, when you reach the 42 roughly, years 42, that's about roughly the cost of living you get from the country. And the other thing is on you as a person to fill this gap and to get more private people then to say, okay, well, if I cannot afford it, so to speak, and give an incentive, say, okay, any investment as a private person you do for your own pension, for another pillar, is deductible from your tax income, from your personal tax income. Maybe partner with some companies to provide us certain plans which then the companies have also encouragement, that becomes a tax deductible. Of course, there's an impact on the tax income, so we try to avoid the balance, but just a thought might be considered. Another one is we have the contributory pension and those ones for the non-con pension, and those ones have not contributed, technically speaking. If my wife stays home her life, never worked a day, she can claim the non-con pension. But maybe the household income would be sufficient, and it's maybe not designed for my wife, where it's never been employed. So maybe add a rule to say non-con pension are really for those ones who really need it, if that makes sense, so that we're not spending money on people who are kind of don't need it. Speaking of the self-employed person, I recognize that if I speak to a self-employed person and if I ask them, do you pay NIS? Nah, no NIS. I'm like, but you need to insure yourself. You don't have to pay NIS, insure yourself at NIS. So if we change a bit of the wording, it may trigger a different way of understanding. Insure yourself at NIS, not pay NIS. Insure yourself at NIS. And if you feel like you're smarter in your investment than a national insurance, okay, that's up to you. Then when you register a business, make it automatic. There's no need for marketing or anything. When you register your business, you automatically get a letter, X or email X day later. With that exchange you have mentioned, the systems should speak with each other. Make an interface, make it happen, that when you have the registration number, you get the NIS number. It's not if, when, you get it, period. From another big country in Europe, before you have permission as a foreigner to enter the country, you may have your tax ID already. That's quite interesting. That's very efficient from the tax authority, but quite funny actually. Another aspect you mentioned as well is in regards of contribution rates. Give the option rather having one contribution rate, that fits all. Look at smaller business below a certain revenue income to say, okay, for them it might be a bit ticklish right now. Give them the option to say, 50% of the contribution rate. Of course, the benefit will also be 50%, aka the insurance coverage is 50% of what you should or could have gotten, but your business just starting, just kicking off. So we understand. I mentioned the contribution as deductible from taxable income. Another point is, if I have a person who's going to help me around the house, around the garden or whatnot, I have two options. I go for a company who's going to send me an invoice, or I go for someone who gets something at hand. Okay. Encourage people to ask for invoices, aka get the people also from the consumer perspective encouraged to go to register the business. Then because if the invoice with, let's say, X dollar per year can then be also a deductible from the tax income. So we have private people encouraged to ask for invoices. And furthermore, if you increase contributions rate, because it must be, as a young father, I really would appreciate if also fathers are going to have a time off from work. And yes, you may say, well, we're just talking about reducing the minimum payout, but it maybe has a different aspect, a different spin to it, because if it shows that fathers stay at home, they AKA take on responsibility and have the time maybe to think about the next generation that is literally in the front of their face. And not only when sleep, but actually when cries. So, furthermore, when people are gonna...
Could you just repeat the last one, as a young father?
As a young father, if you have the chance to stay home for the most critical 6 weeks after birth, then you must take on the responsibility of the newborn. You not just can sort of say, go to work and let's stay mom and the baby home. If you take on responsibility, that I think has a wider impact than just staying home. Because you take on responsibility of the next generation. So start like, oh, next generation, I'm on my way out, okay, what I have to do, okay. Another point is in regards of education. If people are going to leave the school and don't know what NIS is, then I think our education system is good but not excellent. Because when they are in school, as simple as in primary school, ask once a year, okay, is your mom sick? Okay, do they get from NIS a sickness benefit? So just drop it there like slightly so, and then later on 11 plus exam, ask for the current contribution rate. Why not? So they have an understanding what national insurance is about. It's not taking money from mom and dad, it's insuring mom and dad if anything happens in life. Finally, that is correlated with people trying to get their own home. If I'm not mistaken, Australia it is, I think Australia, where you have the option once you have a certain age, I think up to age 35 roughly, the contribution you have paid to the national insurance equals an amount you can claim back as a mortgage security. And that would allow also people to say, okay, what does it mean? That need to be discussed, of course, with further entities in the government, NCC and whatnot, but it's just an idea to say, is that a measurement that can help us in our Bayesian way to solve the problem? 2, 1, get people the option to have an own home. And secondly, what will the impact on the national insurance? Because if you increase the contribution rate is one thing, but you increase services as well and options as well, there's maybe more appetite to accept that aspect. Yeah, that's about it.
Leaving the list with us?
Yeah?
Leaving the list with us?
We would love to have the list or contact, you know.
Yeah, no problem. My handwriting is maybe not as perfect, but maybe I have the chance to type it in a more readable way. And my contact numbers as well. Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just say one thing on the paternity benefit, because that was mentioned. And just for information, so the Ministry of Labor, also responsible for national insurance, is seriously considering a paternity leave provision for the Labor Act, the Labor Code, which in turn would trigger a paternity benefit for national insurance. That's also on the table, right? So it would be employers being mandated to give leave to fathers, and if that comes into being, then NIS would have a similar paternity benefit to what we now have for maternity to provide that benefit. And so the idea is that all the options don't have to be a negative, right? Some options could be an addition. So as we said earlier, 55-year-old system, some things don't work well today. So for example, we had a gentleman last night who is partially disabled, right? He has a speech issue, but he looked physically fine and wants to work. He's been deemed invalid because of his disability, and so he gets a benefit from NIS every single month. If he went to work part-time and NIS found out, they would cut him off totally from the benefit. So I think in today's age, he should be able to get something from NIS because he can't make full earnings as he regularly would have, but encourage him to go to work. He pays contributions, he leaves home every day and does something productive. He's a better part of his family, better part of his society. So reduce NIS costs, increase contributions, and he's happy working during the day. So the idea for these discussions is to hear everything, right? Not everything means cutting. We want to make everything better and comprehensive. And again, consistent for Barbados in this year and the years to come.
I'm sure somebody must have a comment or a concern. We really do want to hear everything, you know. Thank you, sir.
Hi, good afternoon, Stephen Robinson. Just a comment on what you said just now with the example with the invalid. Same issue with persons who are eligible for an NIS pension but want to continue to work. If they continue to work, they're immediately cut off from the NIS pension. I think that's something that you should look at reviewing as well. Partial employment, partial pension. Just that comment. Thanks.
Anthony Barrow. I find that you focused a lot on the demographics, but in your presentation you also mentioned that there are about 25,000 unemployed, not unemployed, self-employed persons out there, and 1 out of 8 of them, I think my term is right, presently is not contributing to the system. Only 1 in 8 is contributing. I'm a little nervous. Forgive me. I believe that you need to find some way of bringing them into the net. We are right now in 6 crossroads, bordering St. George, St. Philip, St. John, Christchurch. But most of the services that I have to perform as a Philippine, I have to go in Oistins or in town. It is not easy to transact business in Barbados. And this area here is a big hub for business. I believe that if an office was placed up here and persons educated, as the gentleman said, from primary school up, is educated about the importance of systems like these, then I believe they were more receptive. Coming to, and I feel for you gentlemen, because coming in a crisis situation, people are not always receptive to it, right? So I think that there need to be more ongoing education, not just that you must pay your contributions, but what you can get out of the contributions at a later stage in life. And we in the department, you have not been very good at that. And as far as you mentioned about the governance model, and and good governance in your presentation, but you looked at it from another angle. The angle that I was thinking about is how much power and control do you have if a minister of finance, if a government decide, well, look, you know, I want this amount of money from in here because I have my people out there. The thing, and they're convinced the people, well, look, it might be good for them at the time, but down the road, you are depleting a fund, which is really the people's money, right? So I believe that controls need to be put in place for a fund like this, that a politician cannot just wake up one morning and decide, look, we need some money to carry out a project, and this is where we need to turn. So that is something that I think you, as a group, should seriously consider, and I think that the people of Barbados should agitate for that. This is my money. At least I look at it as my money, and as I stand here and see Mr. Adams, I started paying national insurance the week after his father became Prime Minister. I started work the 2 days after, and I have been paying ever since then. So when I hear that, you know, the fund is being depleted, they only have 12 years and things, you know, some things went off in my head. So I'm hoping that this is not just a good PR arrangement, and that some concrete measures can be put in place to protect this fund and this institution.
You okay if I take that one? Yeah. Thank you, sir. You know, I made some notes there. We fully agree on education, and I think the CEO might want to talk about the office at some point. But I just wanted to come in on the last point because it's important to understand that the depletion of the fund is not due to the management of the fund. The depletion of the fund is due to the demographics of more and more retirees and fewer in the working population. The very first graph I showed was designed to show that the fund has returned a steady 6% on average since inception. But this growing difference between retirees and the benefits that they're paid and the financing by the working population is what is pulling the fund down. The fund in 2013 did not contribute to benefit cost at all because we had a strong working population or a sufficient working population. But from 2014, that deficit started and the fund was called upon to meet the gap. And that's what's continued today. And that force, that demographic force, is what's going to exhaust it if we do nothing between now and 2034 or 2036. That was just a point of clarification. But maybe the CEO, I don't know if she wants to talk about office up here.
Good night, good night. Yeah. I'm just about to probably say something that might be surprising. You know, if I remember rightly, the NIS was involved in the Four Seasons investment. Wrong or right? You put money into building hotels, right? Well, in my opinion, you might call that investment, and I can call it a bad one, right? Because I don't let me get anything. As far as I'm concerned, more hotels in Barbados can't make no more money. But the point I'm trying to make is that if the NIS is going to be a good fund, it has to make investments. It can't just let the money stand there, because money in Barbados is devaluing at a rapid rate. It has to make proper investments. The most viable and proper investment in Barbados at this point in time is alternative energy. We cannot get away from it. It is something that is basically free for Barbados. If you had known Professor Headley, the guy at Cave Hill, who was researching alternative energy in Barbados, you talk to him and he would tell you that the sunshine, the value of the sunshine or the radiation pressure in Barbados is second only to that of Sharjah in the world. In other words, we have an asset in sunlight which is ridiculously great. But we also have an asset in wind which is almost as great. It was researched since the 80s, and the researchers showed that Barbados could run off of wind energy. So we are talking about two of the greatest assets in the world, because people have the habits, especially politicians, of saying that Barbados has no assets. It is so ridiculously wrong. Alternative energy is the greatest asset in the world, if you are going to own it. The NIS has money, or it had. If it's going to invest, cut a long story short, invest in alternative energy. The problem with alternative energy and investment is that it can go to entities overseas, entities who are private that don't really represent the people in Barbados. But if it goes by way of NIS, it should definitely represent all people, the poor people, the handicapped people, the everything, if it is done NIS. And I would also say the credit unions. We need to invest heavily, and I don't want to hear this 30%. I want to hear 95% of the ownership of alternative energy should be Barbadian. And if we have a lump sum coming from NIS in conjunction with the credit unions, we can make alternative energy make Barbados a rich place. If you allow alternative energy to be taken over by overseas entities and private entities that do not have the people at heart, just like in tourism, we are going to be suffering like how we suffer now. Of course, it leads to what role does government have to play? Because basically, an NIS investment is a government investment, okay? And it will mean that the government has to, and the problem with government doing investment is that, I don't know, people say stealing and bribing and also all the things are probable. But you need a system which has a lot of integrity, a lot of transparency. And that is where we are lacking. The government has to make transparent investments in the NIS, with the INS, the credit unions, and let us take over and own alternative energy. And I'm telling you, it's the only thing I see now that can save Barbados. And let me repeat, we have to make investments in alternative energy. There's no sense having a fund and saying, you got people getting older and people getting younger and all kinds of things, and you're making an excuse why you got to let people live to 50 years to get investment. It ain't going to work. It is nonsense. Going around in circles. Money can make money if it is well invested. And we need to invest in our greatest assets, alternative energy. Right now, you can also include wave energy, which needs a little bit more research. But wind energy and solar energy is well researched already. And all we need is the momentum, the guts to go forward. Amen.
Thank you.
Good night. A little short, right? So, I would like to suggest, right? Pardon? Oh, my name, Roysdale Katoy. Firstly, I would like to suggest, right, that right now we're in kind of a panic mode. And in my mind, this town hall meeting is a very reactionary approach to what is expected to happen in the next 12 years. And in my mind, why wasn't something like this done before someone had to come out and say, well, there's going to be a crisis in 12 years. I think we needed something like this town hall before this crisis happened, because I'm very certain that you probably projected that it would be a possible issue in the next 12 to 13 years. I would suggest probably later down in the coming months or even this month that a greater effort is done to organize a bigger or on a wider scale this kind of meeting. A couple years ago, I would have been to a synod meeting. This is a Catholic thing. A synod meeting where the entire diocese would come together and discuss certain issues regarding the diocese. I think, and it would have ran like for a day or so, the entire day. And I think that is something that we would need in the foreseeable future to better handle these kind of situations, right? My second suggestion is for the reluctance of the employers to pay in the contribution. I think that the employers should get a percentage cut on the contribution, because I can imagine a case where employers would be kind of reluctant to pay their contributions because the employer's rate is like they have to pay on every employee's percentage. I think that is, well, just vouching for the employers a little bit too much, but I think there's a possible need for the percentage cut. Also, I think is in my belief that so much power should not be in the employer's hands in paying the employee's contribution. I know it is for the security of the investments from the contributors, but I think the power should be given to the employees to pay in their contributions just as you would for your life insurance from the private companies, you have to pay in yourself. That's your private situation. Likewise, I think the NIS should work the same way, because it is in your best interest to pay in your life insurance. You have to pay in your NIS insurance. If you don't pay in, you don't get anything. But if you do pay in, you get something. But when it is in the employer's hands, it is like a toss-up. It is a toss-up. If I get sick, I have to no wonder if I'm even going to get anything, whether or not my employer pays in, if my employer had paid in anything throughout my working time. So I think that is something that is a big issue, a very big issue. I'm sure everyone can attest to that. You're not getting that surety that your contributions are being paid, and then the NIS would call the employee and ask them about their contributions, where it is actually the employer that is responsible for paying in those contributions. I don't think it's right. We probably heard this a couple of times. The disabled should be allowed to pay in contributions. Well, work and pay in contributions, either at a lower rate or whatever they see fit. They should have an option to pay in how much they see fit. A greater effort should be made to educate people on the benefits of NIS. I will admit, since the whole crisis has come up, I have learned more now than I ever did over the past 5 or 6 years I would have been working. Right? I've learned more about NIS. Yeah, sure, I heard a couple ads when I was younger, but I don't think it was enough to really show the importance of NIS. And I think a greater education needs to be put out there to teach people the benefits of paying INS. And as the guy in the crowd was saying, not just pay NIS, but to ensure, is a surety, is to insure yourself, you know? Frankly, non-contributors should not be receiving benefits. Yes, I've heard that the non-contributors, the benefits are received from the Treasury, right? I think that's what I heard the other night. But in my mind, if everyone can't, if there are more people becoming self-employed, there's a greater propensity for them not to pay NIS. So is the Treasury going to continue giving out money to the non-contributors in that case? As if you keep giving out, then is the well going to run dry? Well, it would run dry, I'm guessing. And I have a question from, you said about the backlog of the financial statements. I would like to know how come that there was this backlog. Thank you. I think that is all.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank all of you for your questions. I know several of you, Mr. Hartman, Mr. Barra, young gentlemen, and so forth. You mentioned the need for education, and like you, we are recognizing the need to step up our education campaign in terms of the benefits, in terms of the procedures, and so forth. So I think that this occurrence has thrown up that, and you can look out for us doing a lot more in terms of education as we go forward. The second point, the young man mentioned in terms of employers and who should bear the responsibility of paying in the contributions. What I can say is if your employer sends in the returns, as in they record it, even if he has not paid or they have not paid, you will still get your benefit. Once we have a record that you have worked, whether he has actually paid it or not, we will still give you your benefit. Recognizing that these things tend to happen, we have a portal where everyone who registers now with NIS, we automatically register you on the portal. You can go on the portal and you can see the contributions that have been paid in on your behalf for all of the years that you have worked, for all of the employers, and you are able to check that. So what we have done is to put employees in a greater sense of control so that they can check periodically and see what is happening. So you're no longer subjected just to the whims and fancies. We encourage you to sign up for the portal. And I'm pleased to say that since we have been having these town halls, as you suggested, I have seen a tremendous increase in the number of persons that have registered for the town hall, and I would encourage you to do so. So I look forward for you registering.
I would like to ask about the portal because last night I heard you said that you can check the portal. The portal, that's not
Come to the mic, please. Come to the mic.
Right. Last night you made mention about the portal, but the portal is this is an online situation. This is, you go on NIS.
And you see portal, and you follow the prompts.
But I went on the same page last night, and I was not able to get onto it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, now that you've mentioned it again, I think that is something that also needs to be worked on. I think that's something that also needs to be worked on. Not only in NIS case, but most of the government businesses, there is a greater need for an online presence, a better online presence, more up-to-date online presence, because half of the time you can't get on online on the government businesses at all. But yet there's this thing, well, this new thing where they're asking you to get onto online. But Barbados just isn't ready as yet for the online work life. And I think that's something that really needs to be focused on more. A greater focus must be placed on the online situation instead of just saying, go online.
We can discuss that. We have other members of staff here,
yeah.
And you could share with us what your experience has been in registering.
Okay.
Is it that you're not able to go on, and you could tell us what kind of error messages you may be getting so
Yeah.
that we can fix that. But we can do that offline after.
Yeah, definitely. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. There is a suggestion for a possible reduction of the months for an unemployment benefit. I think at the moment it's like 6 months or something. You can possibly reduce to like 1 month. Thinking that the 1 month reduction could possibly save a great amount. The numbers were crunched, and it was estimated to be like around 13 million or so, because this is just like a hypothetical, if there are 20,000 people earning unemployment benefit, and you reduce that 1 month, it could amount to almost $13 million saved for just that 1 month. So if there's a case where it can be reduced, I think that's something that can be possibly looked at.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to answer 2 of your questions, and I'll start with the last one first. The unemployment fund is a pay-as-you-go fund. The idea is that you build up the fund as you work, and when you have crisis like COVID, you draw down. So during COVID, normally we would pay out about $50 million a year annually for the unemployment fund. And during COVID, we paid out $150 million. Of course, it has kind of gone back to the pre-COVID levels, and that fund has pretty much built back up itself. So because the benefits are fairly defined, I don't think people might agree with you to cut unemployment benefits from 6 months to 1 month. But as we said, all the ideas are on the table. But the unemployment fund is a separate fund from the National Insurance Fund, and that is designed to pay as you go. You build it up, and if there's any crisis, you draw it down and you continue. So that fund is pretty much stable and doing well. Oh, okay. Yes, and again, it bears the point that the funds have to meet the needs of the country and to meet the needs of the working public. Prior to COVID, it was 6 months, but after COVID, when you had the crisis in the tourism industry, you remember it was extended to 40 weeks and then further extended. So the funds always have to meet the needs of the society, and that is what we are discussing here. So none of the funds are in crisis at this point. The unemployment fund is not in crisis, and neither is the National Insurance Fund. None of the funds are in crisis. We have told you when they can be depleted, and that's if you do nothing. But the funds currently are not in crisis. We continue to pay over $65 million per month in benefits, so they're not in crisis. With regard to the audits, the NIS is required to prepare financial statements annually for all of their funds and have them audited. For our small funds, the audits have been completed up to 2020. These are the Retraining Fund, the Sugar Workers Providence Fund, the Catastrophe Fund. Those audits have been completed pretty much up to 2020. The fund that we are talking about where the audits are behind, in 2007, the government changed its system from the cash basis to the accrual basis. And this provided some challenges. And so we are in discussions with the Auditor General to revert to a modified cash basis. And this is primarily concerning our accounts receivable, verifying the accounts receivable. If we go back to a modified cash basis, we are only dealing with cash in hand and not receivables. So the financial statements have been prepared or already prepared. As I had said at Combermere, July's financial statements, July 2022 is sitting on my desk. We have the financial statements up to date. It is the audits. So we have in hand audit reports for 2010 and 2011. The audit fieldwork has been completed for that audit from 2012 to 2014, and we anticipate now that once we get the agreement with the Auditor General, we will be able to complete the audits for 2012 through to 2017 by the end of this year, and all the others, which is 2018 right through to 2021, by June next year. So we are actively working with the Auditor General at this point, and the audits for the National Insurance Fund for the years 2012, which are the ones who have not been audited as yet, 2012 through 2017, we should finish them by the end of this year, and 2018 through 2020 by June next year. So by June next year, all of those audits should have been prepared, laid in Parliament, and then available for the public. I think I have addressed most of the comments that you would have made.
Hi, good evening. As I said, I wanted some clarity on some of the comments that were made. Sorry, my name is Dwayne Burke again. I just wanted some clarity on the comments that were made at Combermere School. Mr. Chairman, start with you first, Mr. Haynes. You said that the national insurance is responsible and is one of the engines of growth of the economy. What do you mean by the NIS is the engine of growth of the economy?
NIS is a social security scheme. It is a scheme that must have some community benefits, so that, as distinct from a private enterprise, the national insurance gives some weight to in dealing with its local investments, to the benefit that the society will gain from that investment, provided, of course, that the investment meets other criteria. That's what I mean, it's an engine of growth.
All right, so I'm trying to relate that back to one of the comments that I heard the Prime Minister said recently, but I'll go back to what the Deputy Chair and what Mr. Osborne would have written in his report, whereby they say that the economic, using your report, the economic experience of the years 2018 to 2020 impacted or depleted the reserves. And I think, Mr. Chair, Mr. Deputy Chair, you had shared something to the effect that the NIS was impacted by the economy. I think you shared a chart on the real GDP performance, because you had mentioned the demographics and some other things. Can you repeat your statement in terms of how the economy impacted the performance of the NIS? Something to that effect? Or close
we can pull up that chart page. You know, the economy is the key here, because a healthy economy creates jobs for people to work and contribute in a pay-as-you-go system. That's the essence of it.
Right. So going back to because the concern that I had where is here about the engine of growth, because it goes back to either what this gentleman here or the gentleman in Lilac was saying. He was talking about one of the engines of growth, right? So like you're saying that is one of the engines of the growth of the economy. The Deputy Chair and the Actuary, Mr. Osborne, is saying that the economy impacts the NS. So it's like almost like a circular illogic. So it didn't make sense to me, because you can't have both, it's one or the other. And then one of the things that's more concerning to me is that I'm hearing engines of growth. I'm also seeing the historical perspective where that we know that there was outside influence historically in terms of the investment and what the investments were made in terms of the NIS. We had the Four Seasons in 2012, somewhere around 2016, there was a potential investment in a housing fund. And I think one of the concerns that a lot of people have is that concept of the engine of growth, because there needs to be a separation between political influence on the governance model within the NIS. It needs to be a separation from investment management, and there should be no influence. So you're talking about social, etc. I think of it in terms of a pension scheme, and where you are the lawyer here, where in the NIS Act does it say that? But you have the legal experience. Right, okay. So where in the NIS Act, if you're the chairman, where in the NIS Act does it say what you just said? We can't.
It is recognized that if we go back to the very beginning, that the NIS, or the National Insurance Scheme, whilst providing a benefit such as pensions, unemployment, all of those benefits to the public at large, it also acts as a catalyst, because when the NIS collects, we collect about how much million a month from contributions? What? about 50 million. And we in turn have to invest that money. The investment portfolio is diversified, and some of that, part of that investment portfolio goes to improving social amenities and other matters that we as a country need. It's as simple as that. Yeah, pardon?
Sorry.
We are not in the private sector. The private sector will do something that benefits them. Yet at the same time, we at the NIS look around and determine that there's a social interest in A, B, or C. And as I said before, once that meets the criteria, the other criteria of investment are met, we go ahead with it. But it has to pass, it has to tick certain boxes.
So I'm not going to disagree with you that we need to be investing in social and other activities that benefit the country. Where I will disagree with you is that that's not part of the profile of a pension fund. A pension fund, and you use the word private, I used to look after a pension fund, and my interest is not the benefit of the company. My interest is the benefit of the members. So when you as the chairman use terminology like that, it caused me pause, because the NIS should be operating for the benefit of the membership, which is everybody in here. What you described is a separate funding, that separate disclosure. So when you said that, about investing in social and such, so when you said what you said, and then I heard what the Prime Minister said, it caused me concern and pause, because it says that the NIS is not going to be acting without influence, but then you're saying that you have to invest in these particular ventures which may or may not fit the profile of what the NIS is supposed to be doing. So that's why I'm asking you.
I never said that, Mr. Burke.
What do you mean?
I never said that.
What do you mean?
That the NIS has to or must invest.
Or I'll change the wording.
Particular investments.
They could. What I'm saying is, you said that we look at those type of things. So what my concern is that we're getting garbled here in terms of what the NIS should be doing. Mr. Osborne, in general, in a pension scheme, isn't a pension scheme to operate in the best interests of the membership? Because the objectives, because what you're saying, that's a totally different objective, and it's not in...
With respect, Mr. Burke, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
But perhaps, it could have been said better, but what I'm saying to you is that when we invest locally, we invest for the benefit of the country at large, and that investment goes back to the people or the pensioners or those who are given benefits.
Okay.
It's as simple as that.
So we will disagree on what you said, that you invest for the benefit of the country at large. What my position is that the NIS should be investing for the benefit of the membership. That's what I think the NIS, and there's two different objectives.
The truth about it is I don't really see that difference. Because when I see the country at large, I see each and every Barbadian. But that's a matter for dispute.
And I'll jump in here with a little bit. So the principles of Social Security speak to investing and the purpose of investing and the goals of investing. And they mention yield, which we all want. Preservation of capital.
I didn't hear the first one.
Yield,
right,
return,
yeah, okay,
return.
Yeah.
Preservation of capital, which I think we all want. The third one is social utility. So there's some investments that may yield a smaller financial return than an alternative, but the social return is, I was going to say huger, but it's larger, right? So we think about infrastructure, water, light, solar, the different things. So there's something that NIS schemes traditionally have done that may not meet the yield objective of other investments, but by having something done locally to to improve the way, in this case, Barbados operates, as I said, roads, water, schools, it depends on what it is, could be better for the country without that particular investment. And so I can't remember exactly what the portion of assets allocated in the investment policy to that type of investment is, but there's nothing wrong traditionally in Social Security world of having investments that are deliberately less financial return if there's a sure or a perceived social return.
I'm fully aware of that. I'm fully aware of all the ESG that's going on.
And ESG is another one now, which is same thing.
So I fully, but what my concern is, I'm hearing from the chair the objective, and that cannot be the primary objective. It has to be within the structure of a framework.
Mr. Burke, that's exactly what I said. It is within the framework of the investment. I said once the other boxes are ticked, you don't really take something and say, well, this is a social investment. The other boxes must be ticked. There are other considerations to be given. So I don't see us.
Your opening intro said it must be the engine of growth of the economy. One of the engine of growth of the economy. We will disagree on that. Mr. Deputy Chair, isn't what your chairman asked, suggesting there, and what, I'm not sure if you read what the Prime Minister said yesterday, but isn't what they're suggesting a sovereign wealth fund, and not and that is within the gambit of the sovereign wealth fund and not necessarily within the gambit of the NIS? And the reason I'm asking is because we've had the sovereign wealth fund discussion. It was your idea.
Look, I'm not sure what the Prime Minister said yesterday. I feel like there's a broader point you're making, leaving unsaid, is that the governance and the investment policy statement has to be looked at very carefully and adhered to. You know, and we said at the beginning, all ideas are on the table, and that is one area we certainly do want to look at, both in terms of the allocations and what are the goals of each investment.
Yes, that's exactly it. Because you have to understand, we're very sensitive to this because we've come here and we've heard that $1 billion has been cut because of XYZ. We have situations where the fund in the past has been, it should be at, what was it, 54% allocation, and so now at 70-something percent. 2020 was 72. Yeah, somewhere around there. Anyhow, we won't shave for 3 points. Is what? It's above the allocation. Yeah, but it's above the allocations, but significantly above. And people are very sensitive to that, and that I think one of the things going forward is that it doesn't make sense any solutions that we come to today if that's not fixed. Because if we can come and say, we need this particular project to work, which was what happened with the Four Seasons, we needed that particular project work, whether you need it or not, is not something that the NIS should be in. And one of the things that I would like to see is the investment guidelines of the NIS, if that can be made available. Certainly, I would like to see that, the investment guidelines.
I'll just say I'm not sure that is a secret document or anything, but it has been revised, and we're going to revise it again. Yeah. So we want to answer all questions and don't conceal anything, because we in undertaking this thing we detect that people feel that they don't know enough. So if people want to see it's called an IPS, Investment Policy Statement. We'll publish the investment policy statement. Already on the NIS site, there is a tab called Investments, and it needs to be filled out with more information, but there is information there.
Ironically, I use the principles of governance given by the ISSA. I'm not sure if you all are still members of that.
We are absolutely still.
So I use their principles of governance, which is transparency, accountability, participation, and predictability.
Yes.
And there's many others. So I've been using that, and I would say that from 2017, I and a few others have been saying, I hope none of you are relying on the NIS for retirement. So this discussion that we're having here is probably about 4 years later than it should have been. In fact, when the current party went in power in 2018, I thought I was going to fix. I threw away all my NIS notes from 2017 and prior. But I do have a question for you, Mr. Osborne. I'm trying not to dominate, but I'm just trying to get clarity. You're using some point analysis in terms of your analysis in terms of like the depletion dates, etc. From an analytical perspective, I prefer more like delta, which is like trend or change, etc. So what I looked at is I looked at how these dates moved, and I'm a bit concerned about how the dates move. So if I look at 2008, the depletion was 2068, 2011.
Different reports. Okay, all right.
Yes, previous reports. So it was 2056. So it declined significantly between 2008 and 2011, and there was an explanation given for that. In 2014, it dropped to 2053. In 2017, it was 2051. So it was kind of steady. But what happened between 2017 and 2020, it was dramatic. It fell, I think, 44% down to 2036. And that happened between the period of 2018, 2019, 2020. Mr. Chair, you said you were here in 2018, so... not here tonight, but at Comamere. You said you were in, I have it right here. Yeah. You said I have been on the board since 2018. Right. So you were here from the inception. So in 2017, it was 34 years out. In 3 years, it declined by 15 years, or approximately 44%. So we are saying that, yeah, we have this issue and not to panic. But if we use that trend analysis, that means that that report was done in 2020. We're in 2022. We're 2 years in. The report is due next year. Does that mean in 2023, based on the trend, that we're going to be seeing a depletion in 2028, or has that slowed? So are we discussing 2036 or are we discussing 2028?
Right. So there are many factors that go into projections. Your starting point, first of all, and then we make assumptions.
Right.
So every 3 years the actuary comes in and there's a new starting point. So the starting point is worse than the projected 3 years from the last starting point. If that makes sense, then you're already down.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then we look forward. So if with 3 years of experience, the new outlook for Barbados is less optimistic or more pessimistic than it was 3 years ago, then you have assumptions that are going to be more pessimistic or less optimistic than they were 3 years prior. So what we see now, so we have debt restructuring, which is factored in before. COVID is now factored in. We see the actual decline in NIS contributors. And look at this line. So what we see is that not only is the employment going down, which is the quarterly surveys from the BSS, we see NIS contributors going down. So when you make the projections, and economic growth brings two things. It could bring two things. More work, change in workers, delta up or down, and delta for wages up or down. Delta meaning change in, year over year. So the starting point was lower. The outlook is more pessimistic, and therefore the results this time are less favorable. It does not mean that, let's say for example, I really hope that after the discussion the last couple of weeks, compliance goes through the roof for the rest of the year and next year, because NIS gets better at compliance. People appreciate NIS more after COVID and start paying contributions. The employers who haven't paid contributions for the last year or two, who are delinquent, NIS goes after them in a very aggressive way and collects contributions. Right? So we could see improvement in contributions. We will see improvements in investment income because the 8% bonds now have a full year investment income. And with the reforms that hopefully are going to be made in the next few months, they won't kick in for a little while, they'll be transitioned in, but hopefully the outlook for the fund is changed. So it's all about starting point and assumptions going forward.
So the question to you then is, and if you're right, we go to Vegas. Are we discussing 2036? Or are we discussing 2029 at this stage?
I'm not sure why you're saying 2029. 2029 is very unlikely.
I'm using the trend of the 44% reduction
fair.
every 3 years.
That's not fair, Mr.
No, but I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm saying, are we discussing 2036 or based on, because we've had 2 years experience.
Right.
It is not, I know it's not a fair question. That's why I use the reference Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
What are we discussing? Are we saying the trend is the 44% or has that slowed or has that sped up? Because
Well, there's no trend.
But that's what I'm asking.
There's no trend in the projections of the year being depleted. There's no way you could say that there's a trend because each set of projections is based on a new set of numbers.
Understood.
Yeah.
So the big question is that there is a downward trajectory, a downward trajectory.
It could change. It could be next year.
It could be
41 or 51.
It could be 2041.
Yeah, depending on the outcomes of the next couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so last, not least, one of the things I do have a problem with is when you phrase the 1 billion as a net wash.
Right.
I have a problem with how.
Let's talk about that.
Just to give perspective, the magnitude of a difference between 1 million and 1 billion. 1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years. To minimize $1 billion that was literally, we could say, taken away from the membership of the NIS, and to minimize it in that fashion is not, I don't think is in good taste.
Right.
I have a different phrasing for it, but I won't use it tonight.
Well, let me hear it.
No, I call it political hogwash.
Okay.
Because I think that it's and then I've seen how people minimize the 3 years because it would have been 2039 versus, but that 3 years is, so 3 years from 19 years is a 15.7% reduction in the depletion of the reserves. If you have a 15.7% reduction in the depletion of the reserves, that is considered material and reportable, isn't it? Like if you
I don't think it's fair to talk about depletion of reserves in terms of percent change from year over year. That's not.
No, what I said is the depletion of reserves would have been, you said 2039 versus 2036.
Okay.
So that 3 years over those 19 is a 15.7% reduction on the so when I see this and I see it as something that's material and
it's a material change, yes.
Material change, and then you say that it's a wash on the taxpayers.
No, I didn't say no. Two different things. Two different things. No, the change occurred.
Right.
That's a different story. That's one story.
Right.
The right pocket, left pocket, net zero sum game illustration that I gave is totally different. And just for the audience, the discussion is about NIS lost, let's say $1 billion. It's about 1.3 plus 0.4, but they came back to just $1 billion. When government collects revenues, it collects revenues from taxpayers, workers, employers, and some foreigners, tourists pay some hotel tax and so on. When NIS collects contributions, they come from workers and employers, almost the same group that pays taxes. So when NIS lost $1 billion on its balance sheet in government paper, the NIS fund was worse off than it was before. Agree? Agree so far, Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Right, okay. When government wrote off the debt to, well, let's say NIS only, in this particular example, of $1 billion, future Barbados taxpayers were off the hook for $1 billion because government no longer had to meet that commitment to NIS of $1 billion, and therefore the taxpayers in the future, whether it be 1 year or over 20 years, are off the hook for $1 billion. So to the extent that NIS contributors are the same as government taxpayers, it is a loss in your right pocket, essentially, and a gain in your left pocket. It's an economic argument, but it makes Barbadians no worse off or no better off. We could disagree on that one.
We will have that discussion at that
Afterwards.
stage rather than
Right, after
monopolize.
drinks.
So I get to my final point, which I guarantee you is, because I actually did have to make a point, but I would needed some clarification.
Sure.
The point is, I understood what the deputy chair was using when he was using the 80 and working backwards the 7 or 8 years to get back to the 72, because it was basically what is now, and using the 74 minus the 67 to get the, so 74 was the average death rate. We have when the 67 rate was done, is that correct? That's how you got the 7 years, right? So you were working back from the 80 to 70. So the 72 years that you're using, numerically may make sense, but in reality, it is not founded in reality. You will have a situation whereby, does anybody in here want to have a doctor at 72 doing open heart surgery on them, a bus driver driving them at 72, or like the lady last night who commented, the waitress in the restaurant, she's 60, she can't stand on her feet anymore, and is she going to be able to do waitress service? When she gets to 68, she can't remember with the order and mixing them up and everything. I don't think it's realistic. I think it is oversimplistic to go back to the increase contributions and decrease the benefits type scenario to fund. You have to get creative. I think there needs to be an expansion on the sovereign wealth fund. It was in the manifesto in 2018. I encourage that to be done, and that can be used to smooth the FX, and it can also be used as a hybrid to smooth the NIS. Would you agree that it can be used on the NIS?
Thank you. I can't remember if you walked in before or after we started, but almost the very first thing I said was, please don't get hooked up on the 72.
I heard that.
Okay. This was an option, and nobody has said
what I would say is remove that option, get creative, and let's get back to where we are. There was a lot of good thoughts that come through, but I think we need to move away from this standard increase contributions, decrease benefits. We got to get creative. There got to be innovations and governance, and I want to make sure that we separate the influence from, because our power used for good today can be used for not so good tomorrow. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. We would, by the way, we would love your creative ideas. I think we agree. If we can find creative ways to transition to a solution that doesn't overly impact people, because we know this is going to be painful. It's the point of these town halls also. So please keep them coming in. You know?
Good evening again, Nicholas Hartman again. I'll make it brief and short. One aspect in regards to the investment where we may differ. When I'm in chairman of an investment bank, I may have to look for the highest yield in regards of numbers and calculation Excel file. If I'm the chairman of a national insurance board, then it's about more the people. So as you rightfully said, in my opinion, there's something that cannot be calculated in dollars in any investment. On the other note, to get people also early into the understanding what is national insurance about, give them a chance when they contribute about 5 or 10 years, write them a letter or an email and say, congratulations, your paid contributions overall is X dollars. Your projected pension could be X dollars if you continue contributing in the way you have done so far. So it's kind of almost like a loyalty point system that you get, like, you're happy if you're gonna collect Massey points, so let us collect contribution points. That's my statement. Thank you.
Good night. My name is Roger Huller, and I just want to speak to an issue that's relatively dear to me, and it surrounds NIS, even though it is a little bit more complex than that, and that is not just about NIS, but nevertheless, let's talk about it. So I work in a sector that one would say next to tourism is probably one of the only sectors that is working right now. My challenge is this. So we have a situation where we have workers, most of whom, quite frankly, work I don't want to say that they're at the bottom of the scale, but within the market, they're at the lower level within the market. And the challenge is this. In my hands, I have signed testimonies of workers who have been complaining that they work for companies and the companies refuse. As a matter of fact, what the companies do, instead of giving them like a term contract, they would give them like a contract of service. A contract for service versus a contract of service. So really what they're saying to them, instead of putting them on staff, they're treating them as contractors. And as such, they're not paying their NIS, they're not getting any overtime. So in other words, they're not getting any of the benefits to which they are entitled. And of course, once again, it is clear that there are employees. I know we've had several lawsuits, we've had several cases in court where this came up. And if that is not bad enough, some of these companies are actually making and winning millions of dollars worth of contracts from the government. Why still treating their workers like this? I personally find it affront. I find it unacceptable. And I just simply think that obviously something has to be done. I'm not sure who's going to bell the cat. I'm not sure who's going to bring these people to a Christian understanding. In this day and age, we cannot continue to treat workers like this. It is not fair. It is wrong. And I am hoping, I wish we have the Bar Association, we have NIS, we have employment, the Barbados Employers in Confederation. We have all kinds of organizations who I know might very well be aware of this. I know it happens in the construction industry for sure. I know it happens in the tourism industry. And it is wrong. So there are people that would like to claim, would like to pay their NIS, who later on in life will not have much of a future. And I saw it when the pandemic hit, when COVID-19 hit and we had to shut down. We shut down twice, in 2020 and 2021. There were workers who were left without an umbrella, who were left without any form of security. I saw them on television, keeping noise, asking their employers, begging their employers for money. But they shouldn't be doing that, because if the employers were doing what they were supposed to be doing and what they should be forced to do, this would not have happened. I find it unacceptable that the government will be handing out contracts knowing full well that these are the kind of things that are happening. I know I heard Tony Moore speak to it. I heard the Labour Minister speak to it. But nevertheless, this is something that has been happening for a while. And I'm hoping, I'm praying that somebody would be able to do something about it and put an end to it. It's not fair, and we can't be treating workers in this day and age like, I don't want to say slaves, but that's what it is. It's almost like modern day slavery. It's not right. It's not fair. We're taking advantage of people. And I'm not saying, I don't mean the NIS, don't misunderstand me. I'm saying that a situation is created, and I know NIS normally they used to send out their people, and I think people should be forced to open their books. And then again, if you're doing that, they're probably not on the books anyway. So I don't know, but I just think that something has to be done, and it just cannot continue as is.
Good night, everybody, and good night to the panel. My submission will be, the name is Shamar Bovell. My submission will be Shamar Bovell. Yes, Shamar Bovell. My submission will be relatively short. Two of the issues which I see clearly, there's an issue of compliance and a demographic issue. You really can't get away from the baseline issues. Now, I watched the meeting, I believe, yesterday, and I heard Mr. Strickland's submission. I'm from the north. I drove all the way down here for this because I wanted to make a submission. I heard Mr. Strickland's submission that you should tie it to the practice certificates. Although that is a good idea, I don't think it is sufficient. Reason being, you will find persons in formal jobs, doctors, lawyers, accountants, other formal professions. They have to get the practice certificate to practice. But it's difficult to tell a plumber he has to go get a practice certificate to be a plumber. He's going to stay below the radar, do his plumbing. If he has a charge a little bit less than the man that is registered, he charges a little bit less, and he still gets his customers. I thought Mr. Strickland would have gone a little bit further, and if I may add to Mr. Strickland's submission, I believe maybe it should be tied to the banking accounts. If we have to do the FATCA thing when the time comes, we have to take in information to show where we're getting our money from. Maybe we could add an NIS clearance certificate to the bundle of documents that you have to take to maintain the bank account. That would hold you a little bit better, because even if you're not paying or you're paying, most people are still banking the money. People aren't keeping the money in a shoebox. So the question is, where is the money and how do you justify the money on the bank, in my opinion? Secondly, I think there's a demographic issue. The last time I heard, I think the average life expectancy for Barbadians was what, 77 years or something like that, or is it higher now? Is 80 now? The reality is I think we have to rethink what retirement with the NIS looks like. It can't be retirement and going home and waiting on that check to come home and get 2 checks every 2 weeks, you go and cash them. Maybe retirement looks like you go home and you depend on maybe a smaller NIS pension and private investment. Maybe not for the persons who are there already, but maybe for my generation. It can be go home and wait for the NIS. There has to be more done than that. And the reason why I say that is because older people are going nowhere. They will still be here. So when you have persons living to 80 now, we still have free health care, easy access to medications and what's not. People may live even longer. So you have to take into consideration this problem. If we just deal with these issues now, where the money went, that's a non-issue for the future. That's just kicking the can down the road. You have to deal with things more systematically than that. Now, you could tell me if it's even possible, but there may be even tiers of pension. Let's say most persons, when they retire, let's say they retire at 67, a lot of people are still paying off for that last car. A lot of people might still got 2 to 3 years to pay on their mortgage. Their expenses are a lot higher. They're relying sometimes on that NIS pension to cover expenses which may still remain from life. Let's say they get 100% pension up until, let's say, the life expectancy, let's say it's 80. So you get 100% of your expected pension up to 80. And then after 80, maybe a step down. I don't know if that's already done, or I don't even know if that's possible. Let's say you get to 80, that's as much as we expected you to be here for, and everything else is a plus. I don't think you should be paying a mortgage at 80. I don't think you could get a loan to buy a car at, let's say car loan is 8 years, you get a loan to buy a car at 72. So let's say the cost of living then should be, in theory, less. And you step back that, let's say your pension is $1,000 a month at the time, for the full duration of the expectancy of your life, your pensionable life. At 80, maybe you step back to 700. And then maybe even you get to 90 years old, you step back maybe to 500. 90-year-old persons don't have the expenses of a 67-year-old. Those persons are sitting down in the house. Let's tell the truth, most persons are just living life. And let's say the main consideration of older persons is how you're going to bury me. I heard a lady mention the funeral grant. So instead of the government giving you $1,500 every month over a 12-month period, whatever that calculates to, maybe the government then, for older persons, let's say you die above the age of the same 80, maybe you, instead of getting a funeral grant of what it is, $1,500, something like that, what was it? $2,100? Maybe then you get a higher funeral grant of maybe $6,000, $7,000. The average funeral, decent funeral is about $12,000? Yeah, $12,000 for the average funeral. Unless you want a big casket with gold trimmings and all them sort of things. But the average funeral is around $12,000, $15,000. You get a funeral grant that maybe covers half of the funeral, and then the expectancies that you cover the other half, and that's it. But let's be honest and look at some of the issues which are with the pension too. A lot of people's pensions, their younger children spend them. That is the truth. You have the younger children collecting the 90-year-old grandmother pension, and that is her lifeline. Is that what is expected? And we have to ask ourselves that. No, the issue, as I said, a demographic issue. You have to increase the pool. And the reality is that Barbados is like a country who's wearing a king's clothing with a pauper's reality. We are a very strange country, and we learned this in sociology from the time you were in like second form. We have the realities of a developed country, but our economy is a poor person's economy. So the situation is that you have younger people now choosing to have children later, having less children. I can see it from my personal experience. I'm 30 years old. All my friends are around 30 years old. One of my friends has children. So what is going to happen to 5, 6, 7 generations from now? What is the size of the NIS pool? What is the size of it? So, and then you looked at who's going to have all of those extra children. Is it going to be middle class? The middle class in Barbados is disappearing. So how are we then going to increase the pool? The reality is that it's unlikely to be increased because you have more developed nations have failed to increase their pool, and they're now looking to immigration to increase their pool. That's what everybody resorted to. Whether it was England bringing in nurses and bus drivers and what's not, Canada bringing in farm laborers, immigration has been used to increase the pool. So then what are we going to do? You have to spend less money. And that is the idea that I have. Step down NIS pensions. It is not hard. It's not easy. But life is not meant to be easy, unfortunately. We have been pampered as Barbadians to believe that we should live the lifestyle that we live. You look around the Caribbean, they don't live the lifestyle that we live. And we have to maybe tighten our belts for a little bit to get to the next step. Or we may have a reality of what happened in Trinidad, Guyana, or Jamaica. We may be next on the list. And that is just the extent of my submission.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll just say, no, it's a very interesting concept. And I guess my homework, or our homework, so in 2016, the IDB and the BSS did a living conditions survey, right? The Local Statistical Service and the IDB funded. And we have to see if poverty, how closely it's linked to age. And if there's different consumption levels lower as you get older. That's an interesting concept, and we should look at that, certainly. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you. We've run our 2 hours, but if somebody wants to make a last submission or comment, please come forward. You know? Thank you, sir.
Hey, good evening. Name is Chris Callender. Just a couple of observations. You currently have about $2.5 billion in these Series E bonds in your portfolio. Those are currently getting you about 8% in dividend in yields. And that money obviously, as you said, has been being paid back for the last 4 years. And they have a 20-year life left in them. What happens as you, well, earlier someone asked about the strategy of the reinvesting, the investment strategy. And it didn't sound as if there was really a strong attempt to really change that. You sounded happy with your 6% per annum since 1960, whatever it was. But the reality is, if you have these bonds that are rolling off all the time, we're currently in a cycle where interest rates are very, very low in Barbados and around the world as a whole. You have to find different alternatives of how to make your portfolio still keep that level. So the question is, how will you stick with the same strategy and still gain these types of yields? I think the strategy has to be changed. I know you did say earlier that the IPS will need to change, and I hope that means just about the way you look at everything will be adjusted. Just another observation before you answer there. Going now into that one to looking at you take $200 million every year from these bonds that you have rolling off, paying back. What do? You need to diversify that money. You see, you're trying to keep it away from government securities. What are you actually going to put it in? So you have that $200 million coming in. You then have, as you said, $50 million a month, or well, I don't know if there's a gross number or net number. $50 million a month coming in contributions. Some of that adds to the portfolio. Where does that go? Go ahead.
So there's what's going out is more than what's coming in.
Right, yeah, sorry. That's
so
correct.
Even though you have the 200 from the bonds,
yeah,
you have the 50, whatever, in total, you're still short.
Yeah, you're right, okay, I understand. But you need to diversify, and I've read in previous publications where I don't know if it's the central bank or the Ministry of Finance has basically said, no, we're not allowing you guys to get any access to foreign currency to make any investments. And I think that's very odd, especially in a day of where in the last few years, especially this year, we're now hearing, well, we need to go the whole green climate change avenue. We're probably going to change 1,000 government cars, which cost maybe $30,000 each, US. All right, so that's like $30 million right there in US dollars to go into cars to drive on our roads. But if you say, hey, if your investment team says, hey, well, we want to invest $1 million in Tesla, what happens there? You'll get a no. And it's just interesting how the consumerism is put, continue to roll on and allowed, but we can't have our money as investors, as members of the pool, invested in a prudent manner. And I do understand, yes, many cars come here, mechanics get work, road tax or gas tax, whatever it is nowadays, gets paid, and that's how the economy runs. But I think if you're going to put $30 million into cars, maybe you should consider, or at least get some sort of agreement with the central bank. If this year you're going to allow let's call it a nice round number, $100 million in cars coming in. You say, hey, central bank, we'll give you a blanket coverage to bring in $10 million worth, buy $10 million worth of whatever equities you need in whatever country. Or bonds, I should say, sorry, also.
I'm happy to take this one. Thank you, Mr. Callender. Well, I'll start with the last part first on FX. Excuse me. So the actuary and I actually met the governor of the central bank yesterday, and he expressed willingness to allow FX, us to actually buy FX if needed. So I think that's one important factor that's off the table at the moment. Of course, there are limitations just how much you could take out. But at the moment, that path is clear. You made a few other points here. I just try and run through them. So 6%. Are we happy with 6%? I'll start there. 6% on a portfolio which you don't want a lot of volatility in a low interest rate environment, which we have at the moment, is really not bad. And I'll just tie that to the 200 million you mentioned that the whole portfolio throws off. It's about 185, 190 million. Even if we doubled that, it doesn't fill this gap. So there's an argument there to be made about don't be too reckless in how much risk you want to take on to raise this thing from 6%. I think we could do better than 6%. We have a very heavy allocation in bonds. I think I mentioned earlier, New Zealand is exceptional in this. It's not a standard, but they have an allocation of almost 80% in equities. But their overall context is different from ours at the moment. And you talked about strategy. Well, part of the reason we don't talk an awful lot about strategy is because we're really here to try and understand what people feel and think, but we have had these conversations. So it bothers me a great deal that we have so much government paper on our books, and it's only a small comfort that it's paying the 8% at the moment. It's about 2.2 billion. Other things being equal, that's not a bad position to be in, except for the heavy allocation in bonds. Now, Mr. Burke earlier talked about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. We've wondered if some of the things we would like the Sovereign Wealth Fund to do can be done by the pension fund. For example, if it had assets vested into it, land, that would decrease this allocation on portfolio simply because the whole thing is getting bigger, and you could perhaps run joint ventures off of that. But we haven't developed these ideas fully, but they are things that we think about. Another one that would get around the whole problem of FX, where it's still a big issue, is potentially, because those bonds pay 8% and they're relatively attractive, we could ask there's a limited market for NIS to do this, other regional NISs, but we could say, well, do you want to do some kind of asset swap with us, your bonds for our bonds? And we do get country diversification, but we don't get instrument diversification. So there are bits and pieces of things that we can do that we are looking at to see if it's feasible or not. Yeah, I think, you mentioned Tesla. I was just as an aside, I don't know if you really want to put $1 million into Tesla right now, but we would have the option, given what the governor said yesterday, and please be assured we are looking at these things carefully because we think I don't want to use the word creativity, but try and look at it from several different angles, what we can actually do there. So thank you. I think, unless there is one more lady, please, but let's make this, because we've run our full time, unless a whole bunch of other questions are arising, we'll make this one the final one.
My name is Betty Lynn Estway. You would have mentioned that 1 out of 8 self-employed persons pays contributions. My understanding is that if an employer pays contributions late for an employee, those contributions go towards the employee's pensions when they're doing the calculations. But if a self-employed person pays late, those contributions are not recognized when that person's pension is being calculated. Is this the case?
Yes, if it is late at present, it does not come. We recognize this anomaly in the legislation, and we are actively looking into that. As a matter of fact, we talked a lot about self-employed because we have a lot more self-employed than we had before, and we are looking at how to structure the benefits and the contribution for self-employed, that it makes it easier for them to, one, pay, for them to spread the money according to how they get paid, where they can pay. I think Mr. Barrow is gone, but he talked about having an office up here. We're looking at, can you pay at the post office? Can you pay through Sure Pay? All of those things. So we are actively looking at that particular situation and all the other kinds of situations to make it easier and more convenient for the self-employed.
So when you look at that situation, are you then going to be addressing the case of late payments that would have gone before? Let's say in the last 3 years, a self-employed person would have paid late, and right now you're not recognizing those contributions. When you look at that situation, are you going to be addressing it and making those contributions count, or are you going to be disregarding those and starting from this point? Because my thing is, if I'm paying my contributions as a self-employed person when I can afford, which would sometimes be late, and you are not recognizing them when it's time for me, when I reach pension age, why should I as a self-employed person then pay?
Betty, we will certainly look at that. We can't say yes or no now, but what we will certainly look at that. What we're looking at, recognizing, for example, calypsonians who make some money at crop overtime and so forth. If they make their money at that time and they came and paid it in August, we will spread it all over the year. So we say you have up to December 31st to make your contributions. So we are going to look at that. Certainly, if we can ensure that any person who would have been in the situation that you have been, and we can make that count, we will do so.
All right, the other thing is, I would have heard of a few cases where persons who never contributed to the scheme get just a few dollars less than their partners who would have contributed maybe for 40 years. Why then would I contribute if I know that as a non-contributor, I will get $20 less than my husband who worked for 40 years and contributed to the scheme?
Betty, let me say for the benefit of the others here, the NIS does not pay the non-contributory benefit. The NIS doesn't pay that. The government pays that. We administer it, but the government pays that. And that is intended to ensure that the most vulnerable do not fall below the poverty line.
But the most
there was some legislation and there were guidelines that maintain some kind of a relativity between those two funds. And again, as we look at all of this information, we will look at that as well. And the non-contributory is no longer right at one time when the country needed it, like how we only have about 5 persons who get the Sugar Workers Provident Fund. When the country needed it, there were lots of people on that. as the country doesn't need it anymore, you move away. So it is no longer a right. You have to apply. I think that we pay only about 4,000 people who still get it. I think the last time I saw is about 23 people who applied. So as compared to like almost more than 40,000 people who get contributory, only about 4,000 get non-contributory. So that is, we will look at that though, Betty, in terms of the relativity between the two, because we accept what you're saying.
All right, the other thing is employers and self-employed persons both from time to time have cash flow issues. But if as a self-employed person, I have cash flow issues and I cannot pay on time, and then I recognize that I still have to pay interest, which is a penalty, why then should I pay?
Betty, we want you to pay. We would encourage you to pay. We're going to work with you. During COVID, we, in conjunction with the IDB, had a program where if the employer kept about up to 75% of the staff, we would allow that employer to defer payments for 3 to 6 months so that when the cash flow caught up, they can come and pay. About 25 employers took advantage of that, and they did and are catch up because they were good payers in the first place. Those kinds of facilities we will ensure and try to make those possible for the self-employed. So we recognize that self-employed do have cash flow. We're going to try to remove some of the regulations. What we're going to try to do is to not make the self-employed fit in the mold of wage workers earning a certain amount every week. That's what we're going to try to do. We're going to recognize the peculiarities of a self-employed person and develop and design a scheme that meets their peculiarities. The scheme right now, as Derek would have said, was designed about 57 years ago. It was designed for a wage worker. You get a certain amount, a fixed amount every week. So it doesn't fit the mode of the gig worker and the gig economy and so forth. So we really do have to look at those things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I actually have one piece of good news, I think, for the last contributor and also the person who came up to talk about contract workers. I received a message from the minister saying that in both cases they recognize they have to make changes. And in fact, the revisions to the Public Contracts Labor Clause Act are currently being drafted. And what you just said, ma'am, about late contributions not being recognized, the minister said that has to be fixed. So he's going a step beyond what the information we had available tonight when we initially replied. So in closing, I want to thank everyone for coming up. I think that, like the last town hall yesterday, you gave us quite a lot of information and a lot of ideas and certainly a lot of interaction. And this is what we've really been looking for. We've tried very hard to explain that this 1967 model we got is obsolete, and we know that we have to do a lot of things to fix it. There were a few comments about the economy and immigration. I think Mr. Novell, I'd pick him out in particular with some of the comments he was saying that we know that we have to create high-value jobs in this situation, and we've got to restructure the NIS to cope with the changes that we're seeing. So it might be skilled immigration, it might be one part of it, but certainly the economy and job creation is really going to be key. So thank you once again, and please, you'll see on the screen now there's a link to a survey where we're trying to collect both your views, how strongly you feel about certain principles, but also your ideas, and even more than that, where there are questions that say, would this be acceptable to you or would that be acceptable to you, we want to hear about that also. So this is really an essential part of what's going to inform us when we get into modeling different scenarios and different structures and what is possible and what's acceptable to finding a Barbadian solution to the problem we're facing. So thank you once again.